Today I'm tying the Lite Brite Leech. This was a swing fly I developed in 2004. I basically came up with it because of winter conditions. I'm a big fan of purple in the winter, and what I did was I took all the concepts of the different flash that we would use to entice steelhead on other flies and kind of put everything onto one. This fly fishes really well over wood. That's kind of why I use the yarn, because it makes this fly a little bit more buoyant, so I can fish it in snaggier type situations where there's wood on the bottom, where I'm not going to worry about getting caught on it. I'm fishing over it. This fly, I use a longer shank, so what we're going to use is a 40mm shank, because we want to give this fly a lot of profile and a lot of movement, because we're fishing it in the winter, so the pools a lot of times that we choose to fish in the winter are much slower. So it's really important to have a lot of movement in your fly in the winter months. So the shank fly is a 40mm, and what we want to do is we're going to use our 140 heavy duty thread, and we want to wrap the shank multiple times. And like I've said before, tying shank flies, you always got to be careful of this right here. It's usually can be pretty sharp, and it can really slice your thread in an instant. To attach our stinger hook, I like to use a piece of 40-pound Power Pro. What I do is I cut a pretty good length off, maybe a little bit under 10 inches. And then what I'll do is I fold it over, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come up through the eye of this hook, right at the eye of the shank, and I'm gonna measure it about the length of the shank. So basically from the end to the end of the eye, and then I just pull back, and that's where I'm gonna tie it off. But what I first do is I kind of get an idea of where I want it, and then I'm going to take it and pull it back out and pinch it and just tie an overhand knot in it. So that'll keep that from slipping if a fish does yank on the end of it. It's not going to pull this braid out. And I would recommend even putting some cure glue or Zap-A-Gap or head cement on this after you do it. Give it a few whip finishes. Well, yeah, then I'm just going to cinch it down, and you can see usually for a measurement on my vise, I kind of go to around the start of this. So I kind of laid it flat on the shank, and then I pulled it right under, and I'm just wrapping it down, getting a good thread wrap. And if you have access, you could cut it, or you can just fold it over and keep wrapping. If you do cut it, I recommend using scissors that are 4 braided line. You don't want to use your fly tying scissors. And then what we're going to do, we want to build up a little shoulder on the back of this. So we're going to give it kind of a hot spot. And because we're using yarn, I'm just going to use a piece of yarn. So I'm just going to get a little chunk of egg yarn and chartreuse. And I'm going to cut it like so. And just kind of pull off the extra fibers, get all that extra stuff out of it. So I'm kind of flaring it out basically. And I'm just going to lay it over the back of the shank, almost like I'm making a tail, and just cinch it down. So this will give a little bit of bulk in front of our marabou, which will give that marabou shoulders and make it move even more. Instead of like when the current hits it and it flattens out, it's going to give it a little more poof, so to speak, so it'll just move a little bit more. So I'm just going to take this and just fold it back and just tie it off like so. So it's kind of like a little hot spot, but there's also meaning behind it because it's going to give you movement. And you can do ice dub, you could do any sparkly stuff, other color yarn. I just like doing this because it gives it that little bit of shoulder. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take a nice piece of marabou. You want something that has a lot of long fibers to it. Like usually I like to use the Select marabou, and what we're going to do is just tie this in tip first. And this is like almost the same way you would tie like a marabou spay fly, a popsicle. Snip the tip, and then I'm going to take my thread and just kind of work it a little bit towards the eye of the shank. So then I'm just going to basically palmer it towards my thread. I'm just kind of pulling the fibers out as I go. So I'm not overlapping it when I'm spinning it. I'm just keep making a wrap in front of the other basically. I'm a big fan of marabou and rabbit. One, because it adds a lot of movement, but it also adds a little bit of weight to your fly, but not enough weight where it's going to sink it and get right on the bottom either. So yeah, about 3 or 4 wraps, and then I'm just going to kind of work my thread in here in between the fibers and then cut the excess right off. So you're kind of finished with that, but then what I'm going to do, and you can get your fingers wet if you want, but I just take it and I'm just going to pull it back so it butts right up to that yarn, and you can see then it gives it kind of that shoulder I was talking about. And then I'll just wrap this, and then I'm going to add the first flash. So on the back here I'm going to put a little bit of gold Flashabou, probably about a matchstick's width. And I'm just going to lay that flat on here, and I don't want to go too far over, just make it a little bit as pretty much as long as the marabou fibers. And then what I'm going to do is take this and fold it back over and then tie it. Because like I said, we're fishing this in the winter months. Water's cold. Hopefully the water has some good color to it, because that's when this fly is really going to work well. So we want to make it blingy. We want to get that fish's attention and draw that strike response from him. And then for the body, we're just going to use a little bit of peacock ice dub. We're not going to use much because we're going to add more to this fly as we go, as far as other material. So I'm just going to take a chunk of it and just kind of dub it on. Just kind of hold this back, because you can see how that marabou is wanting to get in with the thread. And then I'm just going to just wrap it towards the front. Now I'm kind of going to make it thicker in the front with the same concept as what we talked about on this tail, was having some shoulders for that marabou. So I'm just going to make it a little bit thicker here, and then I'm stopping it just a little over halfway on the shank. And then I'm going to take another piece of marabou, and same thing, I'm going to tie it in tip first. So it's kind of even like an intruder fly, and the fact that we just keep adding more movement to it. I'm just going to work the fibers out with my fingers. And then same thing, we're going to kind of move our thread in there so we're not tying over all that. Like I'll make a couple and then just kind of, same thing, kind of move it around with my fingertips. And then we'll just take it, kind of fluff it out, and then pull it back and then tie it again right on that ball of ice dub that we just made of the peacock. It's kind of just basically a filler. Then our next step is we're going to add more Flashabou, some more bling. So what we're going to do is, I love copper. It's probably one of my favorite colors of flash throughout the year for trout and steelhead on the Pere Marquette, especially if the PM gets that nice tannic type stain to it. We're not going to fold this over because we're going to add so much to it, so we're going to get just a thick, maybe pencil width piece, and we're going to lay the copper for a base first, right on top, and then we're just going to cut this excess, because we're going to add more flash to it. Just make sure you get it wrapped down good, because Flashabou, if you start stacking it on top of each other, it's kind of can be like bucktail in the fact that it doesn't have any texture to grip to, so it'll like pull itself right out. And then the next color, we're going to get the electric blue Flashabou, and we're going to do about the same thing. Just a little, maybe on this like a matchstick width. And we're going to lay that on top of the copper. And give it some good wraps. And then we're just going to cut the excess off. So we're just giving it a little bit of blue, and then the next color we're going to put a little bit of red too. Red and blue, they'll catch light really well. So we're going to get some red Flashabou. About the same as we did for the blue as far as width. And we're just going to lay that on top of the blue, just lay it flat. And then for a collar, we're going to do a big piece of black schlappen. So this will still hold all this marabou back, basically, over the shoulders that we created with the dubbing and the chartreuse egg yarn, and that'll give it a lot more movement by putting this in front of it. So yeah, like I said, it's basically all the Steelhead's favorite colors. We have black, purple, copper, gold, blue, and red. And then some chartreuse even thrown in there. So we're going to tie this in by the tip. And we're going to move our thread wrap forward. This is where you got to be careful because you don't want to get the marabou stuck in it as you palmer it. We're just going to palmer this forward. And just kind of pull in the fibers too. Schlappen, you want this webbiness because it flutters a lot in the current, gives it a lot of movement too to the fly. It's a much softer feather than if you were using like a grade A hackle feather that you would tie a dry fly with. That's stiffer to keep that fly afloat, where this is much more web to it. And it'll sink the fly, but yet it has a lot more movement to it. It's not such stiff as far as the fibers go. So yeah, then we're going to give it a few wraps. Tie it off, trim it, and then the same thing, we're just going to pull it back and we're going to wrap like 2 or 3 wraps so it butts up to that marabou, right where we have another shoulder basically of where we stop the marabou. And the next step, because this is a leech, is what we're going to do is I use the burnt orange ice stub, and just like I've done in the past for tying egg heads, I'm just going to get a good clump of it. Like so, and then we're going to stick it over the shank, and I like to put pressure on it and kind of, so it's all around the shank basically. And then I'm just going to wrap it like if I was tying an egg fly. Just kind of making a few tight wraps right in the center of it. Because this is going to be the nucleus for the egg, so we don't want it too big. Just a small little profile. So now I'm going to take this and just kind of work it with my fingers and pull it all back. And then wrap in front. And just kind of trim it up a little bit so it's not overpowering all those nice feathers that you just put on, taking the movement out of the fly. It's just supposed to be going to give it, it's like a hot spot, give it attention, give that fish attention, focus on the brighter color. And same thing, the ice dub, like the bigger you make these heads, the more buoyant the fly is going to be. And then what we're going to do to finish it off is so we're almost making like a nuke egg basically, like you would make, you know, when you're fishing eggs under a strike indicator or bounce on the bottom or what have you. So I'm going to get a chunk of this, it's a chartreuse egg yarn, that's all it is. And I'll still even maybe add a little bit of weight to this, like the little bullet weights like I use, but it's still going to make that fly buoyant enough where you might be able to fish it over log jams where you're not going to get caught on stuff. And that's the beauty of swinging, is you'd be surprised how many pools and runs you can fish with a swung fly compared to fishing an indicator or bouncing the bottom with a chuck and duck rig. So I'm just going to kind of thin it out a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is, just like I did with the dubbing, I'm going to put it in front of it and pinch it all the way around. And then I'm pulling it all back. Just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it still flail out enough. And I'm just going to trim it off at the edge, right at the end of it. So I kind of push on it forward, so you can see I made like a little ball, and then I'm just going to trim it. So it's basically just like, kind of like you do a nuke egg. But it'll just keep this fly floating a little bit higher. And being chartreuse, that's kind of a hot spot, get their attention. And then we're just going to whip finish it.
If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more of this type of content, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. Good luck fishing!